Extension of a language or dialect refers to the process of deterioration in the fluency of its speaker. A language is completely extinct when there are no speakers left in a society that use that language. The most remarkable process of language extension is when community of speakers of one language dominates another language, and over time, the second language deteriorates to the point of ignoring its original language for heritage. The language is declared extinct even if the last native speaker is still alive. When only a few extant speakers of a language remain and no longer use the language to communicate with each other, the language is considered extinct. Often the process of language extension is very slow. That is, one generation after another learn less and less, so that the use of the language is set aside and placed within the framework of traditional use, such as verse and so on.
Next is the history of Tatana language. Tatana language is one of the Sabahan language that is spoken in Sabah, Malaysia. Tatana people are found mainly in Kuala Penyu, at west of Sabah, Malaysia, and majority of them live in the northeastern area of the district. According to Pilis Edun, the Tatana village extends far south to Manunggang Kepi, where the language started to mix with Bisaya language. There are also several allocated Tatana villages along the northern peninsula coast, and a few were located across the narrow channel of the Kimanis Bay in the interior area extending towards Mambaco. As there is a limited number of studies about the Tatana language, it is hard to ascertain whether Tatana language will need its own category or would be considered as a Bisaya variety based on its linguistic intelligibility with Bisaya ethnic in Sabah. However, current speakers of Tatana language identify themselves as an ethnic subgroup of the Dusun people of Borneo. But some researchers consider Tatana language as Murutik rather than Dusuni. The language history of Tatana was also limited due to the language being influenced by Brunei Chinese and Dusun. The Tatana language has a mix of Chinese because in the early 19th century, it is common for the Tatana and Chinese immigrant to intermarriage in which spread the Tipikong belief. The merging of the culture between Tatana people and Chinese immigrants brings about the mix of Tatana language with Chinese language, and also cultural practices of celebrating the new Chinese New Year or Lunar New Year among the Tatana tribe. Tatana brings the meaning of earth people, which means that the Tatana people in the past lived under the earth. However, some people say that the Tatana tribe come from Nunuk Ragang, in which the Dusun tribe also came from, according to the story that has been passed by their ancestors. But this theory cannot be proven true, as the story has only been passed down verbally and no in-depth research can be found about this. That's all from me. Thank you.
There are many factors that affect Tatana language status. First of all, big influence from other language. As we all know, Bisaya language have a big influences compared to Tatana language, even though they have a close relationship. Besides, some Tatanas also mixing their own mother tongue language with other language, such as Bisaya and Dusun. Other than that, lack of exposure towards young people also one of the factors that affecting Tatana language status. For example, some parents are not that serious on preserving their own language. They are busy with all their work and have too many commitments to commit. Besides, some family also facing family problem which slowly causing no interaction between the all family members. Last but not least, limited and non-strategic area. As we all know, Tatana language currently living at the same area with other language that have big influence such as Bisaya and Dusun. Other than that, majority of Tatana's people currently living at the rural area, which are far from city. From this, we all know that Tatana language are become not too exposed to other people, so that it's hard for the Tatana language to gain big influence such as Bisaya.
Hello everyone, my name is Awang Shamil. Today I'm going to present about the suggestions on revitalizations of Taran language which is come from Sabah. There are numerous approaches to revitalizing this language. First of all is child learning. Parents must ensure that the language is used regularly when the child is around. Parents can tell a kid who has slipped into their native language that they know how to say it in their other language. Or they can refuse to answer until the child says it in the language they are speaking. It's also important to talk to your kids about why learning other language is important and what is their benefits. Next is the language revival through the educational institutions. Schools also play significant role in language revitalizations. For starters, it is locations where our community children spend a major portions of their waking hours together. If some of or all of these hours are spent in heritage language, of course, an entire generation of young speakers may be produced. It also has the ability to act as a platform for the transmissions of the indigenous culture and values, which have been lost as a result of colonizations and mainstream education systems. Last but not least, adult language acquisitions is particularly significant because home-based language revitalizations will be impossible without parents who can converse in the language. Language needs and emotions, schools cannot function without native language teachers. A language revival program will face considerable challenges if it does not include a significant adult language learning component.
Next is a history of Sian language. Sian language, or also known as Sihan language, are spoken by traditionally hunter-gatherer group. And nowadays there are only 50 speakers left. And for our information, Sihan people call themselves Punan. Punan is people who live a nomadic life. So Sihan people call themselves Punan because they used to live a nomadic life. Sihan language also have a similar vocabulary to other Kajang languages and are possibly related to Melanau Kajang languages.
Hi everyone, my name is Putri Aisyah binti Abdul Qadir. Today I'm going to present the factors affecting Sian language status. One of the factors is intergenerational language transmission. A small population is much more susceptible to decimation than a larger populations, for instance by disease, war or natural disaster. A small language group may also merge with a neighboring group losing its own language and culture. The factor of language transmission between generations also shows that all informants who are married and have children agree that the Sian language is the language that is passed on to their children. Most of the Sian informants believe that the Sian language should be taught in the home to the younger generations because according to them, language is the identity of a people and it needs to be taught and inherited. However, multilingualism between speakers of the native language and one or more dominant languages has begun to take hold in certain important communication contexts. The dominant language in this context refers to the language that has power or influence over other languages. In this case, the dominant language is Malay or Bahasa Melayu. Another factor that affecting the language's status is governmental and institutional language attitudes and policies. Language policy is the law that refers to the constructions and implementation of language used in a particular language community. When the Malay language was made the official language of the country and the medium of instructions in schools, the Sian language, like many minority or non-dominant languages in Malaysia, experience a deterioration in functional lot in the public sphere. This is due to the fact that the language is no longer functional in the public domain. Unlike the event language, the Sian language was not chosen as one of the subjects under the pupils on language 5 selected. That is all from me. Thank you.
Next is our suggestion to revitalize Sian language. First suggestion is a bilingual method. This method can be defined as the use of both the local language and the language of wider communication as media instruction. Second is language reclamation method. This method, language revival, relies on native speakers as consultants, while language reclamation is based on documentation of the language. And finally is revitalization by domains. To revitalize a language, there are few domains that need to be considered, which is first family, religion, and then society. In family, indigenous people can talk to their children using their mother tongue since their child were born. In religion, some culture are left in a religion where usually nobody can change it. So it is important to keep a religion because their culture are also in it. Third one is society. In society, we can create a society with culture so that it will increase young folks to love their culture and then their language.
Next, I will present about history of Minty language. So, Minty language is one of the Malaysian most endangered language. This language is a linguistically distinct members of Merak Batik branch of the Northern Asian language family. It is still spoken by around 400 people who refer to themselves as Batik Mayan.
So hi everyone, I would like to talk about what factors that affecting Minty language status. So regarding the topic that has been given, it's stated that one language dies every 14 days. Researchers have estimated that by the next centennial, 7,000 languages spoken on Earth will likely vanish due to the fact that communities abandon their native tongues in favor of prestigious languages. This is a very serious case and is very disappointing because it will affect the promotion and preservation of their native tongues. So, one of the factors that be the cause of the language endangerment is the outright genocide. Far more often, language become extinct is when one community finds itself under pressure to integrate with a larger or dominant group. Occasionally, the people learn the outsider's language in addition to their own. Take for example, Batak people has switched to more prestigious language to communicate with people who do not speak their language. However, in another case, they just switch to another language for their own benefits. Another factor that caused the Minty language to come to its endangerment is the needs of learning the foreign language but retain their native tongues, such as occurred in Batak community, where the people had to learn another languages which is spoken widely among the communities. This is not often the case in many other communities in Peninsular. Oftentimes, the communities are forced to abandon their language and their cultural and ethnic identity in favor of the invader's language. Furthermore, another factors of the why the mother tongues dies in every 14 days is migration. If the native speakers move into another place or location in which the government promotes the use of a particular language, since the languages that are discarded are generally regional or minority, the mother tongue somehow will be abandoned. In some cases, the parents believe that there will be more opportunities would be available to their children if they become fluent in the adopted language. More or less, parents will stop using their native languages for this particular rationality. Anyhow, languages can die gradually, which is probably the most natural way for it to happen, but many times there are outside influences involving the struggles of a minority community against the majority society in which they live. The death of a language can start in the home, or it can start in some area as high up as the government or aristocracy. Probably the most common cause of the language death is when a community that previously only spoke one language starts to speak another one. This is called language shift. The community first becomes bilingual, not discarding their native tongue, but soon they start to use the new language more and more until their native language is no longer used. However, there are methods to preserve a language from dying or to revitalize a dead one. The quality instance of this might be what Israel did with Hebrew, taking it from an almost extinct language to one which had entirely new technology of individuals who spoke it as their local language. With the recovering or revitalization of a language comes the recovering and revitalization of a culture and heritage. So it's notable that people are seeking to do something to prevent or at the least gradual death of many endangered language.
For the suggestions to revitalize Minty language, firstly is exposing the language to the world. In these ways, we can expose the language using social media by making documentation video about Minty language. Other than that, by using the social media, we can also portray how the language are being used and the uniqueness of the language can be featured. The exposure that the Minty language get from this will help people to acknowledge it and attract people interest in it. Second of all, archiving the language. Language archiving is one more effective ways to conserve the language. It is practical solutions to make sure that the language will not die, as a record of the language can still be found in physical or virtual form. For example, making an ebook or books for Minty language. In this ways, it can easily accessed by the people. The last suggestions, use the language more often at home. The first way of revitalizing a language is by administering the knowledge of the language directly to a new generation at home. By having more new generation of native speakers, the language itself could be revitalized. The increase of native speaker who can fluently speak the language could help the language to prosper and become more widely used.
Therefore, as for the conclusion, although the role of educator in supporting and promoting endangered language cannot be ignored, making the language relevant to younger members of the community is critical too to achieving the overall goals of the language survival. It is because from now on, as we can see, there are too many languages that are not exposed yet, such as Tatana language in Sabah, Sian language in Sarawak, and also Mintil language in Peninsula. So, to fully exploit the role of this media in the survival and preservation of languages in future, more research is needed to explore how new rules for this endangered language can change language practices and how they can incorporate it into language planning, policy, and rehabilitation initiatives. So that's all from us. Thank you.